Hello Internet! So this video is about the potential dystopian futures we may find ourselves in given our neuroscientific research, possible exploitations in the political and economic landscape, as well as other modern scientific technologies which has the potential to alter how our brain functions. While a lot of the research findings given are real, there is also a lot of speculation as well, so it's important to maintain your judgment of probabilities of states of affairs of future realities. Integral to this exposition is the scientific knowledge of the brain networks, as well as how consciousness arises within them. I have made a video on both those two topics, so feel free to check them out in the description below. So I hope you find it's interesting to consider what real potential futures may be before us, for the sake of safeguarding against them. So now on to the potential futures of network research. Yes, fun time, future technologies. So what could we do with this sort of research and how could we apply it to the future of humanity? So real developing technologies at the moment are Elon Musk's Neuralink, which are nano-sized brain probe inserts. And who knows, maybe one day they'll be released publicly or be an option for so-called transhumanists, which are people who already have chips inside of their bodies to pay for groceries and such. The other interesting technology here is in biotech, so nanorobots configuring neural pathways. This is also a reality, so some researchers have developed these xenobots, they call them, and they are less than 1 millimeter in length and constructed of about 500 to 1,000 living cells. They've been created in a variety of basic shapes, including some with legs. Studies have shown they can effectively move linearly and circularly, join with other xenobots to act collectively, move tiny objects, and live for around 10 days. Scientists believe they could possibly impact human, animal, and environmental health, although their status as programmable living robots made from living organic tissue raises ethical concerns. A final interesting development in nanobot research is using nanotechnology to establish a global superbrain where human thought, theoretically, could be transferred to an artificial interface, establishing a human brain cloud interface. So quite scary stuff when you think about it. I mean, amazing technologies if there are virtues flourishing in this world, but we all know that there is many vicious and malicious people out there with all sorts of agendas. So the hypothetical directions as well for this are a more discrete and focused version of gamma knifing, so microwave used in radiosurgery. And this is where targeted EMF beams could create a neural pruning effect of nets of neurons or connections within a network. So we could see this as having potential for people with schizophrenia or TBI, whereby we can reprogram certain areas of the brain with microwaves or other EMF frequencies. So it's already been known that microwaves can alter neurotransmission and frequency, and there's a list of references there from 4 to 25 if you're willing to look. We also see in studies that Wi-Fi affects stress, emotional, behavioral, and cognitive processes as well. So microwaves have been known to alter consciousness. A group of researchers tested rodents and I believe humans with Wi-Fi fields, which are microwaves, if you didn't know that. After sleeping within a Wi-Fi field, the subjects were more irritable and had more cognitive dissonance than the control group, and after many days of exposure, the behaviors became normalized. And this is already happening. We might not even know how much we're affected because we're all bathing in these fields which alter neuron transmission to a large extent, even at the densities that we're usually exposed to. Now, this isn't to say they wouldn't be subtle, especially to the untrained mind, but who's to say how attuned most people are to the subtleties of their mind, especially without practicing meditation or awareness training techniques. And it reminds me a lot of the parable of the well of madness, where everyone thinks the king is crazy, but he's the only one who isn't drinking out of the poison well, whereby we wouldn't know the full extent of EMF on our subjectivities due to it being so widespread and the mass lack of subjective attunement to the subtle changes within their minds. Now, to be clear, I'm not postulating that this is actually going on. I'm simply giving a reference point to suggest how humans can be aware of what they might be subject to without even being aware of it yet, for the purposes of safeguarding against dystopian futures. So the core idea here is that microwave frequencies like 5G are always talked about as being carcinogenic, but really the issue here is more in terms of how it may affect cognition and what sort of psychopathologies that may lead to long term and change how those brain networks are interacting long term, how much functional connectivity is reduced with exposure. All of this sort of research has not been done yet. So, are we going into a dystopian nightmare? Well, regardless of the answer, what kind of questions should we be asking about this as human beings in order to safeguard against the vast possibilities of control which we may be subject to with or without knowing? And those kinds of questions are asking precisely how might this technology be something else other than what we perceive it to be, especially with respect to microwave technologies and communication technologies. So that means applying a different lens than scientific materialism or naive realism as things being concrete and physical and only that. And this might entail looking at consciousness as a series of information exchanges within a broader, deeper context, perhaps even interdimensional in nature. Let's just have a brief look at what's going on and what's possible. The fields of research currently are AI, neuroscience, nanorobotics, gene editing, and microwave weapons. So those are some very, very powerful scientific tools there. So could those technologies be utilized for vicious means within the exploitation of the economic systems we're in? So in the Western world, it's mainly capitalist democracies with an open market, and in the East, it's communist socialist dictatorships or like thereof. Now, both systems here have weaknesses to be exploited, and that creates vulnerabilities to humans. We see already that corporations and governments have the ability to classify certain information, and that obviously is a vulnerability to humans. We would think that we'd place our trust in people of positions of power, but we have to remember that that's an assumption that we give because we have no other choice, essentially. And there is something known as psychological operations as well. So it could be that researchers themselves can become corrupted through these tactics, and secret research goes on. Now, all of this is very conspiracy theorist, but it's just to give you an insight into the potentials of how this kind of technology and research could be put into the wrong hands. As the old saying goes, when the wrong man uses the right means work in the wrong way. So we have to understand that we don't actually know what electromagnetic radiation fundamentally is beyond perturbations or excitations in a magnetic and electric field which moves at the speed of light. We don't really know much about what those fields actually are. We only know how it behaves and not its actual constitution, if there is one at all. We don't fully understand the constraints of our reality and what constructs it, nor how consciousness actually emerges. So these are really important questions when trying to figure out the question of supreme importance, which I brought up before, which is that how could these technologies be something other than how they appear to us to be? And that not only requires imagination, but also a vast degree of scientific knowledge too. Remember that we don't want to abandon the scientific methodology here because inductive and abductive reasoning are our friends. We just want to decrease the rigidity in how we're seeing the world and how we're ultimately thinking about our scientific concepts, especially in terms of how it may apply to whether we're moving into a dystopian future or not. The other question which we might want to be asking ourselves is, how might EMF or other technologies affect our consciousness in ways which we may become tuned to through habitual operation within our networks and the functional connectivity within them? So people may end up losing the ability to understand many aspects of themselves and what is going on in their world around them. So this may start off as a vague fog within people's minds, and because collectively they are all subject to it, changes to subjectivity would go unrecognized. So the threat is a lack of functional connectivity between networks, and then the stimuli is subconscious programming or some kind of ideological influence upon a species, i.e. humans, thereby potentially alienating them from their natural state of consciousness without them being aware of it. This may be for some nefarious intent or even virtuous intent, we don't know. It's just for the sake of speculation and seeing our vulnerabilities with respect to the research that we currently have. So this kind of alienation from true conscious awareness or their natural state of consciousness could make humans or some groups of humans an easy target for manipulation of awareness, subconscious programming, without us even being aware of it. So that is something which humans may in the future likely need to address, if not already, if classified information is revealing of such details. So some more wholesome potentials of this research on brain networks, well, it could be used to recondition unethical minds or people with a psychopathological conditioning. And I do find this to be very fascinating and necessary for society to know of, and have written half a thesis on it already. So by reconfiguring how the salience and default mode network interact, we could potentially reconfigure a person's understanding of ethical relationships to the world and through self with appropriately trained professionals. Now, this occurs through the altered concept of self in relation to past experiences, where we build our ethics from, essentially. As seen from psychedelics, alterations with functional connectivity of the default mode network and salience networks cause subjects' empathy to increase, reevaluate their notions of self and reality. So the methodology for psychedelic-assisted therapy requires input from philosophy with respect to accounting philosophically for altered self-conception, i.e. the many explanations of consciousness and non-ego, i.e. idealism, panpsychism, monism, dualism, materialism, and helping the patient rebuild and reevaluate human constructs of ethics and morality with respect to their mystical or revelationary experiences. And understanding and integrating those ethical and moral constructs in relation to their learned social paradigms informed by upbringing, emotional trauma, social conditioning, which are direct causes to delinquent and criminal behavior. So the prison system is obviously not the best place because a lot of those behaviors are just simply reinforced through being subject to other people with similar tendencies. So what's the prime candidate here to bring about this change? Clearly, it's the default mode network in terms of its relation to self-conception and self-narrative, and it's also the salience network in terms of communication, social behavior, self-awareness, integration of sensory, emotional, and cognitive information, all needed to reconfigure a person's ethical relationships to themselves and the world. So from the neuroscientific research on psychedelics and meditation already discussed, brain regions and networks responsible for producing expanded awareness of self and other are orientated within the same place. We know that, the DMN and the SN. It includes deactivation of the DMN and functional connectivity with the salience network. So this functional connectivity between the salience network and the default mode networks provides a vantage point for understanding newfound experiences of oneself, social and behavior self-reevaluations, integration of sensory, emotional, cognitive information. So the premise here is that a person with a good conscience extracts his morality from his capacity to empathize as well as his sense of self. So in psychiatric conception, these drugs are a device upon the mind which can temporarily relieve the ego from its boundedness to the subconscious faculties of the mind, allowing for a deeper reevaluation psychologically. So this potential opportunity for subjects to reevaluate their own morality needs research due to the pressing ethical problem of the lack of rehabilitation within prisons and, moreover, the failed punitive justice systems worldwide. So I also have a video on psychedelic research and drug law change, as well as potential implications for mass use of psychedelics. So feel free to check that out. Remember that all the references are in the slides below and they're downloadable in the description section. Thank you all for listening, and I bid you farewell.